"You don't belong here, ma'am. This is for real veterans." The security guard's words cut through the morning air like shattered glass. Margaret Maggie Thompson stood frozen at the entrance of the National War Memorial Museum, her weathered hands clutching a carefully folded American flag against her chest. The guard's dismissive tone echoed off the marble steps as visitors around her averted their eyes, some even snickering under their breath. At 89, Maggie had seen enough battles to know when one wasn't worth fighting. Without a word of protest, she stepped back into the biting December wind, her faded army jacket providing little protection against both the cold and the sting of humiliation. What she didn't know was that across the plaza, sharp eyes had witnessed everything. And those eyes belonged to someone who would soon turn this moment of shame into something extraordinary. 3 weeks earlier, Maggie had circled December 7th on her kitchen calendar with shaking hands. Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. The day the National War Memorial Museum would open its doors free to all veterans for their annual tribute ceremony. The 89-year-old veteran no longer drove. Her eyesight had dimmed, her hands trembled with persistent arthritis, and her steps had slowed to careful shuffles. But her memories remained crystal clear, especially those forged in the mountains of Korea in 1952 and the jungles of Vietnam in 1968. Each scar on her weathered body told a story. Each medal she'd earned was now displayed in her late brother's home, given to his widow because, as Maggie had said, they belonged to the real hero of the family. The journey from her modest apartment required 3 different bus routes, planned with military precision. Maggie rose before dawn, giving herself time to polish her old combat boots and press her faded army jacket. The single Bronze Star medal pinned to her chest caught the morning light as she inspected her reflection one final time. Her granddaughter had offered to drive her, but Maggie had gently declined. "You have your own family to tend to, sweetheart." The truth was, she preferred making this pilgrimage alone. Some journeys were meant to be solitary. The December air bit through Maggie's thin frame as she approached the museum's grand entrance. Marble steps rose toward impressive columns, and colorful banners proclaimed, "Honoring those who served, a special tribute." Ahead of her, families chatted excitedly while younger veterans in crisp uniforms moved smoothly through the entrance, each presenting military IDs or OVA cards to receive respectful nods from the security guard. A young man named Derek, with a close-cropped haircut and an expression of practiced boredom. When Maggie reached the front, she offered her warmest smile. "Good morning, son. ID?" Derek demanded, barely glancing up from his clipboard. Maggie's smile never faltered. "I served in Korea and Vietnam, son. 42nd Infantry Regiment in Korea, then with the 7th Special Forces Group in Vietnam." Derek finally looked up, scanning Maggie's weathered face, trembling hands, and faded jacket. "Ma'am, we need proper identification. Military ID, VA card, or discharge papers. We can't just let anyone claim they're a veteran." "I haven't carried an ID in years," Maggie explained patiently, "but I did bring this." She carefully pulled out a preserved photograph of herself as a young soldier, standing proudly beside her unit in Korea, her face barely recognizable beneath the confident gaze of youth. Derek barely glanced at the precious photograph. That could be anyone. No ID, no entry. Those are the rules. A woman in an expensive winter coat muttered loud enough for others to hear. "So sad. There's always someone trying to sneak in for freebies." Several bystanders chuckled as Derek gestured dismissively. "Ma'am, you need to move along. There are people waiting." Pride kept Maggie's back straight as she turned away. No scene, no protest. Just quiet dignity as she descended the steps, the folded flag clutched tighter to her chest, protecting it from more than just the bitter wind. Across the street, Colonel Jennifer Morrison watched the entire scene unfold through narrowed eyes, her phone already pressed to her ear. A West Point graduate with 22 years of service, Morrison was not someone who tolerated injustice, especially involving veterans. "Sir, there's a situation at the National War Memorial Museum," she said into her phone, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I think you need to know about this immediately." In a nondescript government building across town, General Alexander Alex Blackwood looked up from his desk as Morrison's call came through. At 64, Blackwood was a living legend in military circles. 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. A decorated combat veteran, respected strategist, and fierce advocate for those who served under him. "What kind of situation, Colonel?" His deep voice rumbled through the phone. Morrison provided the details efficiently. The elderly woman's dignity, the guard's dismissal, the bystander's mockery. She knew the general well enough to recognize the controlled fury building in his voice. "There's more, sir," she added carefully. I had someone run a quick check on the names she gave. Margaret Thompson goes by Maggie. The silence on the other end stretched for a long moment. "Send me everything you have on her service record. Now." Within minutes, a classified folder landed on Blackwood's desk. As he opened it, his weathered face went completely still. His finger traced a line in the file. Then he looked up, his expression transformed. "Clear my schedule. Have my vehicle ready in 3 minutes. Sir, should I ask why this has become priority 1? General Blackwood's voice carried the weight of decades when he answered. "Master Sergeant Margaret Thompson pulled my father out of a burning tank under enemy fire at Seoul. If not for her, I wouldn't be standing here today." This just became personal. Within minutes, a convoy of black government SUVs was speeding toward the museum, emergency lights flashing but sirens silent. Inside the lead vehicle, General Blackwood sat with military precision, his face set in grim determination. The convoy pulled up to the museum's entrance with tactical precision. Staff and visitors turned in surprise as General Blackwood emerged, his uniform immaculate, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone within a 50-foot radius. Inside the museum, the ceremony was in full swing. The same security guard who had turned Maggie away was still checking IDs, still maintaining his arbitrary barrier between those deemed worthy and those who were not. Derek looked up as heavy boots approached, his eyes widening at the sight of a 4-star general bearing down on him with the focused intensity of a guided missile. "Sir, welcome to." "Where is she?" Blackwood's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. "I'm sorry, sir." "The veteran you turned away. Where is she?" Derek swallowed hard, suddenly aware that something had gone catastrophically wrong. There was an elderly woman without proper ID. "But you don't belong here, ma'am. This is for real veterans." General Blackwood quoted Derek's own words back to him, his voice carrying across the marble foyer like thunder. "That's what you said to her, isn't it?" The museum director, Dr. Patricia Wells, alerted by the commotion, hurried over with forced enthusiasm. "General Blackwood, what an honor. Is there a problem?" Blackwood turned to the director, his voice dangerously calm. "The problem, Dr. Wells, is that while you're giving speeches about honoring veterans, you have staff turning away actual heroes at your front door." The gathered crowd fell completely silent. Reporters, sensing a story unfolding, moved closer with cameras ready. "Where is the woman you just humiliated?" Blackwood demanded, his 4 stars catching the light like beacons of authority. Dr. Wells paled, looking between the imposing general and her suddenly nervous security guard. "There must be some misunderstanding. We welcome all veterans with proper identification." "Proper identification?" General Blackwood repeated, the words sharp with contempt. "Tell me, Dr. Wells, have you ever seen what happens to military IDs after 60 years of existence? They yellow, they crack, they fall apart, just like the bodies of the men and women who carried them through hell and back." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying throughout the marble hall with commanding presence. "You had a Medal of Honor nominee standing on your steps, and you locked the door in her face." A collective gasp rippled through the visitors. Phone cameras rose, capturing every word. "Master Sergeant Margaret Thompson," the general continued, his voice cracking slightly with emotion, "saved my father's life at the Battle of Seoul. She dragged him from a burning tank while under enemy fire, suffering severe burns to her own hands. My family owes its very existence to that woman. Dr. Wells' face had gone from pale to ashen. General, I had no idea. Of course, you had no idea. Blackwood cut her off. Because you've reduced honoring veterans to a photo opportunity, to speeches and banners and convenient heroes who fit your sanitized image of what service should look like. Colonel Morrison approached, speaking quietly into the general's ear. He nodded once, then addressed a junior officer who had appeared at his side. Find Miss Thompson. Immediately. Search every bus stop, every bench, every shelter within a 5-mile radius. Bring her here safely. The museum had fallen completely silent. The ceremony in the main hall had unofficially paused as word spread about the confrontation. Visitors and staff stood frozen, many sharing looks of discomfort and profound shame. General Blackwood turned back to Dr. Wells, whose face had drained of all color. Do you know why Margaret Thompson wasn't wearing her full decorations today? Why she only had that single bronze star on her jacket? The director shook her head mutely, her mouth working but no sound emerging. Because her other medals, including a silver star and 2 Purple Hearts, are displayed in her brother's home, Blackwood said, his voice steely but heavy with profound respect. Lieutenant David Thompson, killed in action in Korea. Maggie gave them to his widow, telling her they belonged to the real hero in the family. His voice carried both anger and deep admiration as he added, That's the kind of woman you just turned away. No one dared move. Even the museum security guards, moments earlier so self-assured, now stood awkwardly, shame seeping into their rigid postures. Mothers hushed their children. Veterans among the visitors straightened their backs instinctively, old instincts stirring. Outside, across the snow-dusted plaza, Maggie sat on a worn bench, still clutching the folded flag like a lifeline. Her fingers, gnarled by arthritis and time, traced the worn edges of the cloth as if seeking something lost long ago. The winter air bit at her thin jacket, but she hardly noticed. The bus was late, or perhaps she had missed it during her reverie. At her age, time sometimes slipped away like water through cupped hands. She gazed out across the plaza, the world softened by snow and fading light. Bronze statues of forgotten heroes looked down at her with mute sympathy, their faces weathered by decades of standing silent watch. The sound of footsteps stirred her, crisp, measured steps she recognized instantly, even after all these years. Military steps. Maggie looked up, blinking against the light snowflakes that danced down. A young officer in full dress uniform stood before her, posture flawless, medals gleaming under the gray sky. He rendered a perfect salute, his hand snapping up with precision that spoke of deep respect. Miss Thompson, he said, voice steady and reverent. General Blackwood requests your presence, ma'am. Maggie blinked, disoriented. General Blackwood. Yes, ma'am. If you'll come with me, please. Confused but intrigued, Maggie allowed the young officer to help her gently to her feet. Her legs were stiff from the cold, but she moved with quiet dignity as they crossed the broad plaza together. She noticed the cluster of black vehicles idling by the museum steps. A small crowd was forming, whispering, shifting nervously. At the top of the stone stairs stood a figure in full dress uniform, the 4 silver stars on his shoulders flashing under the muted winter sun. His posture was that of a man both powerful and profoundly respectful, waiting not as a superior, but as a son waiting to honor a mother. Maggie's breath caught. Memories flooded back, mud-slick fields, the staccato of gunfire, the sharp smell of fear and determination. She had buried it all deep for decades, wrapped it tight in silence. But now it surged forward with vivid clarity. As she approached, the general stepped forward. Then, before the gathered crowd, before the reporters hastily snapping photos, before the other officers and officials, General Alexander Blackwood snapped into a sharp, perfect salute. Master Sergeant Thompson, General Blackwood said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed plaza. "I'm Alexander Blackwood. My father was Lieutenant James Blackwood, 42nd Infantry Regiment. September 18th, 1952. Maggie's eyes widened. For a long, trembling moment, she searched his face and found it. The echo of a young lieutenant she had once pulled from twisted metal and flames. "Little Jimmy Blackwood's boy," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. A smile, cracked and weathered but brilliant, spread across her face. "Well, I'll be. You've done your daddy proud with those stars, son." A murmur swept through the crowd like a warm wind against the winter cold. General Blackwood lowered his salute and stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. "He made sure I knew your name, ma'am. Made sure I understood what real courage looks like. He told me about that day until his dying breath. How you risked everything to save a kid barely older than yourself." One by one around them, men and women in uniform came to attention. Salutes rose like a field of honor. Civilians, catching the profound meaning of the moment, placed their hands reverently over their hearts. For the first time in decades, Margaret Thompson stood at her full height. Her frail frame seemed to grow, shoulders squaring beneath her threadbare jacket. She was not just an old woman anymore. She was a soldier, a legend being recognized not for her age or her silence, but for the courage that had lived within her all these long years. A military band somewhere inside the museum struck up a slow, solemn rendition of "America the Beautiful." The notes floated out across the plaza, trembling in the cold air like a prayer made audible. General Blackwood stepped aside and, with a gesture of profound respect, offered her the wide marble stairs leading into the heart of the museum. The same stairs she had been denied access to just an hour earlier. But Maggie paused. She looked down at the folded flag in her arms, the flag that had covered her brother's coffin all those years ago. Then she looked at the faces surrounding her, some tearful, some reverent, all watching with breathless attention. Slowly, with hands steadier than she had thought possible, she extended the folded flag to General Blackwood. "For the next generation," she said simply, "for all of them who need to remember." Blackwood received it, as if it were the most sacred object he had ever held, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted the precious burden. Maggie straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and began walking up the stairs. Not shuffling, not faltering, but marching with the measured cadence of a soldier reporting for duty. Each step echoed like a drumbeat against the stone, a rhythm that spoke of honor, sacrifice, and unbreakable spirit. At the threshold of the museum, Maggie turned once more and saluted the crowd. Not with her hand, but with her quiet, indomitable presence. In that moment, no one saw a frail old woman. They saw a master sergeant, a warrior. A living reminder that heroes don't always look like the polished images we expect them to be. And as she disappeared into the great hall, the snow swirled behind her like a cloak of honor, wrapping the memory of her courage around every soul who witnessed it. The story would be told and retold in the years that come. How a security guard's prejudice was transformed into a nation's reminder that respect must be earned through recognition, not assumption. How one general's gratitude became a lesson in honoring those who served, regardless of how they appeared on the outside. Most importantly, it would remind us all that sometimes the greatest heroes walk among us unrecognized, carrying their stories quietly until someone takes the time to truly see them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.